Eleanor's dining room had always been Frank's sanctuary. The colonial-style brick house in Upper Arlington smelled of roast chicken and garlic, the kind of food my mother swore would speed her recovery after surgery. Frank was stirring with a carving knife while Eleanor, her knee still stiff, sat motionless at the head of the table. My cousin Gina took pictures in the background, capturing their conversation and the movement of hands passing green beans. Nathan squeezed my hand under the table, forming a quiet anchor in a house steeped in history and cracks. For the first half hour, everything seemed pretty normal. Frank joked with me about Ohio State University's football stats. Eleanor kept asking for more, and laughter eased the tension of the past few weeks. I thought dinner would be just another ordinary meal this time. Then Derek pushed his chair back. The sound of it scraping the hardwood floor cut through the conversation. He stood erect, his eyes fixed on me. "You stole my wallet," he said, his voice sharp enough to silence everyone. At first, I thought he was joking. The room fell silent, and the fork stopped in midair before I could say a word. He leaned over to the canvas bag beside my chair, reached inside, and, like a magician performing a trick, pulled out his black leather wallet. He held it high, triumphant, as if the act itself proved the crime. Whispers of surprise rippled around the table. Frank froze, clutching the carving knife. Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came out. I felt everyone's gaze on me, a sting of suspicion before I could speak. "I didn't take anything," I said, the words choking me. But Derek just sneered, shaking the wallet like a judge's gavel. My cheeks flushed, my stomach churned. Then, against all logic, I burst into laughter, sharp, mocking, uncontrollable. Because even in that moment of humiliation, I saw it clearly, the bag wasn't mine. Eleanor was there, and she didn't move from her seat all evening. That's when the absurdity of his game finally began to become clear. The laughter that erupted from me at the table wasn't just about the bag or the purse. It was the sudden emergence of years of rifts. Fault lines that had existed since childhood, but no one wanted to see them. Derek and I grew up in Columbus, living under the same roof, but in different worlds. He was the eldest, with the charming smile and sharp wit. Teachers overlooked his missed homework because he could convince them he'd catch up. Relatives praised his self-confidence in bringing families together, calling him a natural leader. I, on the other hand, was the one with the neatly arranged notebooks, the legible handwriting, and the certificates of appreciation plastered on the refrigerator. Not because anyone asked me, but because I thought it might earn me the same applause. Eleanor pushed herself to the limit, working double hours at school, marking essays by lamplight after preparing our dinners. Frank fixed the neighbors' cars in the garage to earn some extra money. There was little room for indulgence. Yet Derek always found a way to buy himself new sneakers or the latest video game. If you asked him, his answer was, "We'll see. Maybe later." But if he asked, the later somehow came faster. I don't think my parents favored one over the other, but survival doesn't leave much room for fairness. Frank admired Derek's boldness. Eleanor worried he'd crumble without encouragement. I filled the void by being dependable, the one who kept her head down and avoided trouble. As we grew older, those roles became more rigid. I built a stable life, a college degree, a forensic accountant job downtown, and a partner who respected me. Derek, on the other hand, indulged in ventures that seemed promising but never truly succeeded. A bar in Short North, a landscaping company that closed before winter, and a tech startup that relied mostly on loans and empty promises. Each time, he came up with a new story, and each time, Eleanor and Frank applauded the effort, not the outcome. I convinced myself it didn't matter, that I was strong enough to prove myself. But the truth is, resentment was also simmering inside me. Quieter, but sharper, like a splinter that couldn't be pulled out. And now, as Derek's voice echoed in our parents' dining room, I realized that those splinters had been waiting for this exact moment to break through to the surface. A week before dinner, Eleanor called me into the living room as Frank dozed off in his comfortable armchair. Her knee was propped up on a cushion. A stack of papers lay scattered on the coffee table. The afternoon light filtering through the curtains made the ink on those sheets look heavier than it was. "I need your help with this," she said, tapping on the first page. A permanent power of attorney, healthcare directives, and a memo about renting a house in Clintonville. After the surgery, I kept thinking, what if something happens and no one knows what to do? I don't want any confusion. I want things to be clear. Her voice was steady, but I could hear a hint of anxiety. She wanted me to sit with her in the attorney's office to go over the details and make sure nothing was overlooked. It made sense. Numbers are my life. Documents didn't scare me. "I can do it," I told her. "Anything you need." I didn't realize then that Derek was listening from the hallway. He entered with his usual smile, but his gaze was sharp, shifting between the papers and me. "What's all this about?" he asked, picking up a file that looked like a menu. Eleanor took it gently, saying she just wanted to organize things. He didn't press her further, but I recognized that look, the one that suggested he felt something slip through his fingers. Derek carried debt like a shadow. Store cards, payday loans disguised as temporary fixes, projects that swallowed more than they gave back. I deduced this from conversations I overheard, the collection agency numbers flashing across his phone, and the sudden urgency when he asked Eleanor and Frank for a loan. If I were in charge of the securities, his authority would be completely nullified. That night, lying in bed, I thought about his glances across the living room, the calculations behind his smile. He wasn't just annoyed, he was trapped, and a trapped Derek is always dangerous. By dinner time, I knew he wouldn't let the evening pass without some kind of performance. The evening began with simple gestures that no one seemed to question. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her canvas bag carefully draped over the back of her chair. The same chair she always brought with her. She hadn't moved much since the operation, and everyone tried to make her comfortable. Derek was the first to approach, adjusting the chair as if he were caring for her. "Let me adjust this leg," he said, bending down, his hands touching the floor, and then the bag's strap. Eleanor smiled gratefully, and none of us paid any attention. Later, when I sat down next to her, Derek came back to me. He leaned over, pretending he wanted to check my chair was stable too. The scent of his cologne lingered long after he'd moved away. He made a joke to himself, something about me being the human calculator that couldn't survive if one of the chair's legs buckled unevenly. It wasn't a good joke, but he laughed at his own cleverness. Frank interrupted, proudly praising my work downtown and how the company trusted me to keep its records clean. For a moment, I caught a faint glint in Derek's eyes, something sharp beneath his smile. Nathan reached out and took my hand under the table, trying to calm me, while Derek flitted from person to person, pouring water, cracking jokes, pretending to be the caring son. He blended into the night like a thread, never still, always visible. In the background, Gina was snapping photos with her phone. She was used to photographing everything at family gatherings. Not staged pictures, just candid snapshots. Little moments, she said, conveyed the truth better than any formal photograph. No one objected. It was just Gina. Her camera was an extension of her being. By the time Frank had cut up the chicken and Eleanor had served the green beans, the room was warm with the usual routine. We laughed about the American football team, reminisced about Eleanor's peach pie, and teased Nathan about still learning the family's inside jokes. Nothing out of the ordinary that evening, nothing to worry about. But looking back, I can see how Derek's actions weren't acts of kindness, but rather calculated moves. Every step was practiced to pave the way for what was to come. The scraping of Derek's chair against the hardwood floor was so abrupt that it broke the rhythm of dinner. Just moments before, Frank had been telling one of his familiar stories about the garage. Eleanor had chuckled softly at the end of his tale, and Nathan had only just reached for the bread basket. Then silence fell, broken only by the creaking of the chair legs and Derek's rising. "You stole my wallet," he said. His words were sharp, almost rehearsed, and his eyes were fixed on me with a certainty that silenced everyone. Before I could reply, he moved with a flourish, leaning over to the canvas bag hanging on the back of Eleanor's chair. His hand slipped inside, his fingers fumbled for a moment before he pulled out a black leather wallet. He held it aloft as if it were a prize. His face lit up with feigned triumph. "See, it was here?" The sound that followed wasn't a single gasp, but a dozen small, overlapping gasps. Eleanor's fork hitting the porcelain, Frank's knife settling mid-cut, Gina's camera slanting down. My cheeks flushed under the weight of all those stares. Nathan's hand trembled beside mine, but I didn't grasp it. My eyes were fixed on the bag, my mind racing faster than my heartbeat. It wasn't mine. Eleanor had taken it herself, struggling with her cane in one hand and her belt in the other. I even offered to help, but she insisted she could manage. From the moment she sat down, the bag hadn't moved an inch. Her knee was so stiff, her body completely still. She hadn't touched it since. That's when I realized how ridiculous it all was. Not just the accusation, but the sheer arrogance of thinking it would be believed. A sharp, uncontrollable laugh burst out of me. Even I was dumbfounded. But once it began, I couldn't control it. It wasn't harsh. It was a clarity that pierced through the panic like sunlight. "Interesting," I said finally, my voice quieter than I'd expected. "Tell me, Derek, when did I bring the shopping bag to this dinner? Or when did Eleanor get up and move hers?" The words landed like stones on still water, scattering everywhere. Derek's wry smile vanished for a moment. Frank's eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of my reasoning. Eleanor touched the bag instinctively, her hand trembling on the fabric. Nathan leaned forward, the air thick with tension, ready, and in that fragile moment, I felt the first thread of his story begin to unravel, the fabric unraveling with each breath that followed. The room oscillated in that strange space between shock and disbelief, everyone waiting for me to stumble. Instead, I leaned back, straightened up, and turned toward Gina. Her phone was in her hand, half hidden under the table as usual. "Gina," I said quietly, "you've been taking pictures all evening. Can you look at the clips, the ones that went live?" She blinked, surprised, then nodded. Her thumb moved quickly across the screen, scrolling through a series of candid shots. Frank cutting meat, Eleanor smiling, Nathan passing bread. Then she stopped, her eyes wide. "Play them," I said. She tapped, and the few seconds of movement filled with silence. Derek was there, hunched near Eleanor's chair, pretending to fix it, his hand reaching into the bag, stuffing something dark inside before rising with that same bright smile he so easily plastered on his face. The atmosphere shifted. Frank's mouth tightened, his eyes narrowing as he realized. "That explains everything," he muttered to himself more than anyone else. "Last week, a 20-pound note disappeared from my wallet in the garage. I thought I'd lost it." Eleanor's hand trembled on the bag's strap. "He asked me to carry it for him before, saying it felt heavy," she whispered haltingly. "I didn't think, but I did. I remembered every dollar he'd borrowed and never repaid, every charmingly contrived excuse. Every time the family had turned a blind eye to his transgressions because confronting them would have been considered a betrayal. Now the logic was crystal clear in my mind. I hadn't brought a bag. Eleanor hadn't moved. The only person who had touched that bag was Derek. He shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the table for anyone to defend him. No one did. Nathan reached out and placed his hand on mine, bringing me back to my senses amidst the storm of revelation. The clip kept replaying in my mind, even as Gina lowered the phone, her face pale. The truth had spread through the room like ink on linen, impossible to erase. The voices suddenly fell silent. Chairs creaked, but no one spoke. In that silence, I felt a weight shift. Derek had hurled his accusation like a stone, but it was rolling toward him. Derek finally broke the silence with a sharp, almost shaky laugh. "So what if I moved a wallet? You've always wanted to believe she's an angel, and I'm the loser. Congratulations, you've got your proof." His eyes met mine and his smile vanished. "You think you're better because you sit in an office with spreadsheets. You've been clattering to control ever since Eleanor mentioned those documents. Power of attorney, deeds of transfer, health directives. You wish everything ran through you." I could feel Eleanor tremble, her hand tightening its grip on the bag. Frank slammed his knife down. Derek continued, his voice rising. "If she's in charge, what's left for me? Nothing. Just a brother who wasn't up to the task. And don't pretend you didn't know. If you got those papers signed, every mistake you've ever made in my life would be written down." Derek's face was pale, a mixture of shame and exhaustion. "I guaranteed one of his loans years ago," he admitted quietly. "I thought it was a chance for him to get on with his own money. But things went terribly wrong. And ever since, I've been carrying the burden." Eleanor took a deep breath, her voice firmer than I'd expected. "That's precisely why the paperwork has to be signed. We can't afford any more mess, but this time there will be guarantees. No one will be taking on debts that aren't theirs." Derek's confidence crumbled, his shoulders slumped. For a fleeting moment, the mask slipped, not swagger, just a man laid bare. He opened his mouth, but offered no excuse. A heavy silence fell between us, as heavy as the truth finally coming out. I sat watching him crumble under the weight of it, knowing that the next step wouldn't just change dinner. It would change the very fabric of our family. Sarai was the first to speak, his voice low but steady. "This will end tonight. No more hidden debts. No more pretense. You will pay back what you owe, Derek, every single dollar, even if it takes years, but you will never have access to our accounts again." Eleanor nodded, her hand on the briefcase like a final seal. "And the documents will be signed. Claire will be in charge of our health decisions. Financial powers will be subject to controls. We need stability, not magic." Derek's face hardened, a spark of anger flashing in his eyes, but the usual words didn't come out. He opened his mouth and closed it again, as if searching for a script he hadn't prepared. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm. "I never wanted to replace you, Derek. I only wanted the truth. I love my brother, but I can't bear your lies anymore. They're too heavy, and they never were my business." He recoiled as if the words had been a slap, his pride bleeding with a pain more profound than any accusation. Everyone held their breath. Then, with a harsh scrap of wood on the floor, he pushed his chair back and stood. "You'll regret this," he muttered, though the certainty in his voice was fading. He grabbed his jacket, clutched his wallet tightly, and strode to the door. It slammed shut, and glasses clinked against the counter. For a moment, no one moved. Then Eleanor exhaled, her shoulders relaxing as if she had cast off a weight she had carried for years. Frank rubbed his forehead, the lines of worry deepening. But there was also a sense of relief. Nathan's hand brushed mine under the table, as still as ever. The air felt different without Derek in the room, lighter, if only for a moment. And in that instant, I knew the ground beneath our family's feet had shifted forever. Weeks passed before the tension in my chest eased. Eleanor spent her mornings at Riverside Methodist Hospital, relearning to climb the stairs with a therapist, her resolve as unwavering as the nurse guiding her. I visited her between work meetings, sometimes finding Frank in the waiting room engrossed in a crossword puzzle, his quiet presence a reminder that even storms leave room for normalcy. In the evenings, I strolled along the Seattle Mile, the river cutting through the city like a dark ribbon, the skyline shimmering on the water's surface, and for the first time in months, I could breathe a sigh of relief without the fear of an impending crisis. All the paperwork was complete. Every document was signed, notarized, and filed under impartial supervision. No hidden hands, no secret promises. Transparency became the language of our new family, and it felt purer than anything we'd ever known. Derek's name still popped up on my phone occasionally. At first, his messages were defensive, blaming me and calling me arrogant. Then they softened into lukewarm apologies followed by silence. I didn't block him. I left the space intact, firm on my boundaries, but unwilling to close the door forever. I realized that love could coexist with distance. Sundays grew brighter. Around the old table in Upper Arlington, Eleanor passed bowls of soup with a smile. Frank cracked jokes about his crossword word failures, and Gina's camera snapped pictures with a fluidity that bordered on laughter. Nathan leaned beside me, his arm brushing mine. We were both part of something more settled than before. The absence of Derek's sharp, turbulent voice was noticeable, but it allowed other voices to rise, voices of warmth rather than accusation. As the meal ended, I felt the weight of what we had survived transform into something else entirely. Not a legacy of possessions or money, but of the dignity of choosing clarity over illusion. It was a legacy built not on what was left to us, but on what we ultimately refused to carry.
अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सहारे थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा बेसर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर भरता है अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा सर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना बहुत ही दर्द भरता है मेरे साए भी मुझसे अब जुदा होने को कहते हैं तुझे खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते हैं कहाँ जाऊं कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू मेरी रूह का मकां तू लकीरों में नहीं लिखा जो तुमने ख्वाब देखा था वफा की इस कहानी में फकत एक गम ही लिखा था सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा मगर खामोश है दुनिया कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत मुझे है आज भी तेरी वफा की सख्त जरूरत साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर दर्द का असर